The day of the engagement, I was set up. My fiancé, Jackson, caught me with someone else. I made him lose face in front of everyone. I became the person he hated most. Before completely breaking up, his eyes were red. He spoke to me in a fierce and ruthless tone. Sophia, you know I can't accept betrayal. Don't let me see you again. I can't stand it. He was so angry that he wouldn't listen to any of my explanations and immediately got engaged to my sister 5 years later in order to raise money for my daughter's treatment. I knelt in front of his house for a day and a night. He took his fiancé's hand, looked down at me condescendingly, and said coldly, "You want me to save that child with money. Don't even think about it." However, he didn't know that the so-called bastard he was talking about was actually his own flesh and blood. 5 years later, I returned to this familiar city in order to cure my daughter's illness. I let go of my pride and knelt outside Jackson's house for a day and a night. Finally, before I fainted, the door of the villa opened. Jackson stood in front of me with his fiancée, my half-sister Emma, looking down on me. Full of arrogance, I looked up and asked him hopefully, "Jackson, are you finally willing to save our daughter?" However, his next cold words immediately shattered my illusions. He said unceremoniously, "What our daughter? Don't be so brazen, want me to pay to save that child? It's a pipe dream." My hand was about to touch his clothes. Suddenly froze. Words also stuck in my throat and could not be spoken. Even though that incident was a long time ago, he is still full of resentment towards me. Emma, however, pretended to be distressed and said, "Sister, it's so cold. How can you kneel on the ground?" After she finished speaking, she stood up and said something nicely. Then she leaned close to my ear and whispered something that only the two of us could hear. "How dare you come back with a burden? Wasn't the lesson I gave you enough?" I instinctively turned my head and stared at her fearfully. I noticed a sinister gleam in her eyes. A horrible thought suddenly came to my mind. I was about to question her. "You were the one back then." Before I could finish my sentence, she suddenly pushed me down. She fell to the ground herself. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Sister," she said, "I only wanted to help you up. How could you push me? You saw me fall." Jackson immediately reached out to help me up, but Emma grabbed his hand first. "Jackson, I'm in pain." Jackson suppressed the strange feeling that had just welled up in his heart. He picked up Emma. He looked at me coldly. "Sophia, we haven't seen each other for so many years. Not only are you shameless, but you're also so vicious." "That's not true," I hastened to explain. "I didn't even touch her. She fell accidentally." Emma leaned against Jackson's chest and suddenly let out a cry. Tears flowed unstoppably down her face. She said, "Jackson, my back hurts like it's going to break." After hearing this, Jackson became even more nervous. His eyes on me were even colder than before. He said coldly, "Leave now. Don't come back and bother me again." After yelling at me, he walked away with Emma in his arms. I looked at Jackson's resolute back. Tears flowed uncontrollably. My heart ached as much as my cold body. I could no longer feel anything. "Jackson, you are still the same as you were 5 years ago. You are unwilling to listen to my explanation. In fact, I didn't betray you back then. I was the one who suffered the most." I finally couldn't hold on anymore. Everything went black. I didn't know anything anymore. When I woke up again, the room was filled with the smell of disinfectant. As soon as I turned my head, I saw my daughter's pale little face. It was full of worry. She threw herself into my arms and cried, "Mom, you've been sleeping the whole time." I was so scared. Hearing my daughter's voice crying, I felt a pang of sadness. 5 years ago, I had to leave Jackson, and only then did I find out that I was pregnant. I couldn't bear to give up this child, so I decided to give birth to her, because I didn't get enough nutrition during pregnancy, and the baby was premature. Her health has never been good. She not only has asthma, recently she was diagnosed with leukemia. At that moment, I felt as if I had been struck by lightning. My meager salary was completely insufficient to cover the huge medical bills. When I was at my wit's end, I had no choice but to go to Jackson for help. "Mom, are you feeling unwell? Why are you crying when you look at Pan?" My daughter's words brought me back to reality. I hastily wiped away the tears in the corners of my eyes and forced a smile. Pan, don't worry. Mom is fine." My daughter took out a lollipop from the pocket of her hospital gown and handed it to me, saying, "Mom, look, the nurse gave me this lollipop as a reward. She said I was very good." My daughter said, "Mom, you're in pain. Here, have this." Her words made me burst into tears again. I gently held her little hand, which had been bruised by the needles. I felt so bad. She was so young and already knew how to care for others. If I hadn't insisted on keeping her, she wouldn't have had to suffer like this. When my daughter saw me crying, she was scared and started crying too. The doctor hurried over when he heard the sound. He asked with concern, "What's wrong? Why are you all crying?" I held back my emotions, wiped away my tears, and looked at the doctor's concerned gaze. "Doctor, I'm doing fine. By the way, do you know who brought me to the hospital?" The doctor thought for a moment and said, "I remember it was like a lady in a maid's uniform." I guessed it right. Now there is only hatred for me. How could they possibly send me to the hospital? The doctor told me, "Sophia, our hospital is about to receive a batch of special drugs. They are very effective for your child's illness. Prepare the money as soon as possible. Don't miss it." Hearing that there was medicine to cure my daughter's illness, I was so excited that I shed tears. "Okay, I will definitely find a way. Thank you, doctor." As soon as the doctor left, I immediately went online to search for jobs that pay quickly. In the evening, after my daughter fell asleep, I went to the most popular private club. The manager thought I looked good and was smart, so he let me work in the VIP room, where everyone wanted to go. Before I opened the door, the manager's words suddenly came back to me. He said, "The VIP room is full of important people. They're generous. If you're smart, you'll get a lot of benefits." I took a deep breath. I knocked politely a few times, then I pushed the door open. As soon as I opened the door, everybody's attention turned to me. I lowered my head and walked in. Suddenly, I tripped over someone's foot. I struggled to get up. I looked up. I met a pair of eyes that were both familiar and strange. It was Jackson. Now he was the center of everyone's attention. He had also become increasingly aloof. I hurriedly averted my gaze. I arranged my shawl, which had slipped a little awkwardly. Someone teased, "Yo, you look pretty innocent. I just don't know if it'll be enough to satisfy our Jackson." Everyone in the private room was staring at me, some with a look of amusement, others with scorn. Jackson gently rocked his wine glass in one hand, his eyes fixed on me with mixed emotions. I saw derision and deep resentment in his eyes. He said to everyone, "Come on, let me introduce you. This is my ex-girlfriend. She used to be the campus queen at Kinghua. 5 years ago, she betrayed me. I caught her in the act." I stared at Jackson in disbelief. I never thought he would belittle me like this. I was clearly innocent at the time. Afterwards, I even went to the hospital for a checkup. The results showed that I had not been violated, but he was in a rage. He never wanted to hear my explanation, but he can't trample on my dignity at will. I said to him disappointedly, "Jackson, how could you have become like this?" Jackson seemed to have heard something particularly ridiculous. He sneered. Then, he yelled at me like an out-of-control beast. "I'll become like this. Isn't it all because of you?" The room suddenly fell silent. No one spoke. Everyone stared at me. Then, the room was filled with derisive laughter. It seems pretty simple. I didn't think he was a restless person. Alas, sooner or later, this kind of person will get their comeuppance, giving up Jackson's position. In the end, he was reduced to waiting tables. He really had it coming. Someone poured red wine over my head. Wine glasses smashed one after the other. Then they fell to the ground and broke. Blood ran down my forehead. It dripped down my cheeks. I didn't feel any pain. I just stood there silently. Jackson stared at me. His eyes were cold. He asked, "Sophia, why are you so quiet? You came here, you just want to borrow money from me, don't you? I'll give it to you." Jackson quickly had a large bag of cash delivered. He said to Sophia, "Do things properly. You just have to take off one piece of clothing in front of everyone. I'll give you $10,000. Listening to these hurtful words, I felt extremely uncomfortable. I just wanted to leave quickly. When he saw that I didn't respond, he raised the price again. $30,000. "Mom, can my illness be cured?" My daughter's words suddenly echoed in my head. "No, I can't leave. My daughter is waiting for me to get the money for her treatment. Will 100,000 yuan be enough?" When Jackson was angry, he threw the money heavily onto my back. My body trembled slightly. My back felt as if it had been stabbed countless times. The pain was so great that I could hardly breathe. In an instant, piles of 100 yuan bills scattered all over the floor. They mixed with the red wine on the ground. The whole floor turned dark red. I clenched my teeth, trying hard not to let the tears fall. Facing the choice between money and dignity, I had to give up my dignity. My hands began to tremble. I started to undress. Usually the buttons came undone easily, but today they became especially difficult to undo. No matter how hard I tried, they would not come undone. Jackson saw this scene. A pang of sadness welled up in his heart. That feeling welled up from the bottom of his heart. It got stuck in his throat. It made him unable to speak. He suddenly remembered the way I betrayed him back then. Rage instantly rushed to his head. Just taking off my clothes was not enough. I had to finish all the wine over there. Only then could I leave. I looked in the direction he was pointing. The table was full of white wine, all poured to the brim. It dazzled my eyes under the white light. He clearly knew that I was allergic to alcohol, but he still forced me to drink. Does he really hate me that much? My heart gradually cooled down. What's wrong? Are you not going to ask for money? He shouted at me again. It's as if it's my fault if I move slowly. Under Jackson's step-by-step pressure, I slowly walked over. My hand holding the glass was shaking. Drink it quickly. If you don't drink it, Jackson will find a way to punish you. Yes, we are all out here to make a living. Why pretend to be so virtuous? You dared to be unfaithful to Jackson. How dare you? How come nothing happened? Accompanied by those harsh words, I gulped down several glasses of wine. Everyone watched this farce with sneering expressions. Only Jackson's face grew more and more gloomy. I kept waiting for him to call it a day, until I collapsed on the table due to an alcohol allergy. I was about to lose consciousness. I heard an anxious voice. You've only been out for a short while. You almost lost your life. As soon as I opened my eyes, I heard the doctor scolding me, looking at the familiar hospital room. I smiled helplessly. I repeatedly assured the doctor that I would not drink too much in the future. She then left relieved. As soon as the doctor left, I started to tell my daughter a story. Unexpectedly, Emma suddenly came in, seeing us, she said. Wow, what a sweet scene. Emma walked straight up to my hospital bed. The innocent, simple expression on her face disappeared. Her face became fierce and distorted. If you know what's good for you, you'll take this child and go. Go far away. Don't let Jackson see you again. My daughter saw me being bullied. She angrily rushed over. She pushed Emma and shouted, "You're a bad person. Don't you dare bully my mother." Emma took 2 steps back. Her face was distorted with anger, her eyes fixed on her daughter. They seemed on the verge of bursting into flames. She shouted angrily, "You little brat, how dare you push me? I'll teach you a lesson." She pushed her so hard that her daughter fell to the ground about a meter away. After she fell to the ground, her daughter let out a loud cry. Her body began to convulse. I dropped everything in my pocket. I only reacted then. My daughter had an asthma attack. I hurriedly got out of bed to find the medicine she always carried with her. The bottle of medicine just happened to roll to Emma's feet. She picked it up with a smile and threw it out the window. Oops, my hand slipped. I'm sorry. She smiled triumphantly at me. Her eyes were defiant. Jackson happened to walk into the ward. I was like clutching a lifesaver. I eagerly told him, "Jackson, Emma threw her daughter's medicine out the window. Go and get it. It's just a bottle of medicine. What's the big deal?" Hearing his indifferent tone, my heart sank. Coming back to my senses, I shouted at him, "It's not just any medicine. It's the medicine that can save my daughter's life. If she doesn't take it in time, she'll die. What does that have to do with me?" Jackson repeated coldly, "She's just an unwanted child. It'll be a relief if she dies." At that moment, my heart completely cooled. Jackson's heart was already filled with hatred. My eyes were red. I said coldly, "Fine. I hope you won't regret it in the future." I covered my aching stomach. I walked out of the ward and looked around for the medicine that could save my daughter. Unconsciously, tears had blurred my eyes. I was in pain all over my body. My heart was also in extreme pain. Tears kept falling. My vision was so blurry that I couldn't even see what was on the ground. I fell to my knees. I crawled around like a reptile, looking for something. My tears soaked the ground around me. Jackson watched this with a complex expression. Finally, he couldn't bear to watch any longer. With anger, he picked up the medicine that had fallen at his feet. He threw it at me. Emma was unhappy. She took Jackson's arm. She said coquettishly, "When it's cold," he told me, "let's mind our own business. Let's go eat. I'm hungry." It sounded like a normal thing to say, but to me, it sounded particularly harsh. My daughter was still lying on the floor. Her life was in danger, but he, as her father, was ignoring her. I looked at Jackson disappointedly. I spoke with difficulty, "Jackson, today here, I'll make things clear. Sophia and the child, from today onwards have nothing more to do with you, Jackson. No matter what the reason, you can't take my child." Emma gave me a cold look, with a sarcastic expression on her face. Jackson impatiently turned his face to the side. His tone was full of contempt. As if I care about you guys. Your life or death has nothing to do with me." Still such cold words. I felt my chest blocked. My emotions were about to get out of control. I raised my hand, pointing to the door. I shouted, "You guys go," I shouted, attracting the doctor. His daughter was rushed to the emergency room. Jackson was busy with paperwork in his office, but he felt uneasy. He kept thinking about the affair I had 5 years ago. He felt that there was something wrong. After thinking for a while, he picked up his phone. He called William's assistant. Find out what happened that year immediately. Give me the result within 10 minutes. In a short while, William's assistant rushed in to report. Jackson, I have the results of the matter you asked me to look into. 5 years ago, Emma sent someone to drug Sophia. They took her to a hotel. Then they deliberately led you to catch her in the act. After hearing what William's assistant said, Jackson felt like he had been struck by lightning. He slumped helplessly in his chair. The scene of his infidelity 5 years ago suddenly came back to him. It was the night before our wedding. Emma called to tell him she saw me walk into a hotel with a man around my waist. At first, he didn't believe it, but Emma sent him photo after photo of me and the man intimately close together. He desperately tried to call me, but there was no answer. Even though he didn't want to believe I would betray him, he hurried to the hotel. When he arrived at the hotel room, he found me and the man lying naked on the bed. His last shred of hope was completely shattered. He could not accept betrayal the most. So even if I later showed him the evidence, he still did not believe it. He got evidence from Emma in advance that I had bribed the doctor to forge a certificate. He also decided that I was a hypocritical and frivolous woman because of this. Jackson, should I continue investigating now? The day after tomorrow is your wedding with Miss Emma. Do you think you should continue preparing for the wedding? Or should you wait until you have clarified this matter? Assistant William's words snapped Jackson back to reality. He suddenly stood up. He hurried towards the door. He didn't forget to remind Assistant William to follow him. First, go to the hospital with me. If the affair 5 years ago was set up, then the child might be his. The more Jackson thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. Outside the operating room, his daughter had been in there for almost an hour. I was so nervous that I didn't dare to relax for a moment. Suddenly, the door to the operating room opened with a ding. The doctor came out. My heart was in my throat. I waited quietly for the doctor to speak. The doctor removed his mask. His expression was a little heavy. My heart suddenly tightened. I didn't dare breathe loudly. Tears welled up in my eyes. The doctor sighed. Then he said, Sophia, the child is currently not in danger of life, but her condition cannot be delayed. Hearing that my daughter was temporarily safe, I let out a sigh of relief. Regarding the follow-up treatment costs, I will find a way to raise the money for the operation. My daughter had just been taken back to her room. Jackson came. When he saw me, he looked a little nervous and at a loss for words. As soon as I saw him, I remembered his previous ruthlessness towards my daughter. My face fell. I said coldly, Jackson, you've come to the wrong place. You're not welcome here. Jackson opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat. Just when I was about to lose patience and tell him to leave, he finally spoke. Back then, I already understood that you were framed. I couldn't believe my ears. I stared at him in disbelief. I sneered and interrupted him. Jackson, back then, you wouldn't listen to my explanation no matter what. Jackson saw that I was getting emotional. He quickly came over to take my hand. He said, bringing up the past again, do you think I haven't suffered enough? I flinched to the side. He missed his target. He looked a little upset, but he asked patiently if you were in my place and you saw what I saw back then. Would you think it was nothing? I couldn't help but laugh. You still don't believe me. What's the point of asking such a question? Then what you said about the baby before. Jackson's words were cut off before he could finish. I interrupted him immediately. The baby is mine alone. It has nothing to do with you. Jackson saw that we couldn't communicate. He shouted at William's assistant, who was waiting at the door. William's assistant walked over to his daughter's bed. I thought he was going to do something to my daughter. I rushed over. What are you doing? Don't touch my child. William's assistant gently touched my daughter's head. He smiled at me. Then he left. Before I could figure out what they wanted, the two of them had already walked out the door. Outside the ward, Assistant William hurriedly caught up to Jackson, whispering, Jackson, I've got the hair. Good. Hurry up and get the paternity test done. After Assistant William left, Jackson went home to find Emma. Emma saw that Jackson was back, so she walked over to greet him. She noticed that Jackson's face didn't look too good, and she felt a little uneasy. She asked softly, Jackson, are you okay? Did your sister ask you for money again? Jackson looked at Emma with a cold face. Tell me, how did you find out that she went to the hotel with that man back then? I want the truth. Emma froze when she heard Jackson's cold words. The smile on her face suddenly disappeared. To hide her unease, she quickly covered her stomach with her hand and pretended to be uncomfortable. Emma said to Jackson, "My period is coming. Can you make me a bowl of brown sugar water now?" Jackson did not act immediately. Instead, he looked at her coldly. Emma couldn't hide it anymore. She had to make up an excuse. She said, "Jackson, it was a friend of mine who happened to run into me at that time. She told me. Besides, I was with you during the hardest time. And our wedding is the day after tomorrow. I've been waiting for you for 5 years. Let's not talk about the past." "Okay." Jackson kept staring at Emma. He wanted to see if she was lying. That's when he noticed a flash of panic in Emma's eyes. The phone suddenly rang. He took the phone, went out of sight of Emma, and answered the phone. "What did you say?" Jackson shouted in surprise. "Jackson, I've found out. It was Emma who framed Sophia back then, and the man didn't assault Miss Sophia." When Jackson heard the news, his heart was filled with sadness and joy. Without even hanging up the phone, he hurriedly ran out the door. I was in the hospital room, having just put my daughter to sleep. The door suddenly opened. A figure rushed up to me. It threw its arms around me and hugged me tightly. I was taken by surprise by the sudden hug. I was about to break free, but then I heard Jackson's familiar voice. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." I paused for a moment. I didn't understand what had happened to Jackson. He clearly hated me. I struggled hard and couldn't help but scream, "Jackson, are you crazy?" Instead of letting go, Jackson wrapped his arms around me even tighter. He rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "Yes, I'm sick, and pretty sick at that." When I couldn't take it anymore, I suddenly felt a cold sensation on my shoulder, and my struggle stopped. Were those tears? Did Jackson cry? Jackson saw that I was no longer resisting and slowly let go of me. When he saw me again, he was already in tears. "Sophia, I was so confused. I only realized now, you really didn't do anything wrong to me." Emma was behind all this. When I heard this, I wasn't at all surprised. However, it was already too late. I looked him straight in the eye and asked calmly, "So what next? The damage you have caused me can't just be erased with an apology." Back then, he found me with someone else on the spot. He didn't even let me explain, and he let other people gossip about me. Later on, he let Emma take my place. I became the laughing stock of Shangjing City. No, it wasn't like that. Jackson hurriedly explained to me. Back then stop it. I interrupted him loudly. "You didn't trust me in the past. That's the truth. And we're no longer related now. You're getting married to another woman the day after tomorrow. Don't contact me again." After saying this, no matter what Jackson was thinking, I pushed him straight out the door. I locked the door to the ward behind me. Outside the door, Jackson leaned listlessly against the door. From a few years ago to the present, the hurtful things he had said about what I had done to him all came flooding back to him. He couldn't take it anymore. He sat down directly on the floor. His hands clasped his head, which was about to split open. He was both annoyed and in pain. His tears blurred his vision. At that moment, Assistant William hurried over. He said, "Jackson, the results are in." Jackson suddenly looked up. He looked at Assistant William. His eyes were filled with panic and fear. Assistant William was shocked by Jackson's out-of-control appearance. He froze for a moment. He immediately reacted. He said happily, "Jackson, the test results are in. You are indeed father and daughter." Jackson was surprised at first, then he couldn't help but laugh. But as he laughed, the smile on his face gradually faded. It was replaced by anger. Emma had dared to set him up like this. He would make her pay a heavy price for it. He briefly told Assistant William a few things. Then he went to the dean's office. The next day at noon, as usual, the doctor should have come to me to pay the fee. But this time he didn't come. I didn't really care. I thought it might be that the doctor was busy and forgot. In the evening, I suddenly received a text message from an unfamiliar number on my phone. When I saw the words "waiting for you," my heart skipped a beat. I immediately thought, this could be from Jackson. But then I thought, he's getting married tomorrow. How could it be from him? I laughed to myself. In fact, I've long since stopped thinking about him. My future life will revolve entirely around my daughter. The next day at noon, all major media platforms and TV stations were broadcasting Jackson and Emma's grand wedding live. At the wedding site, the host asks Jackson, the groom, "Do you take this beautiful bride in front of you as your wife, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health?" Today, Emma, dressed in a white wedding dress, with delicate makeup and a happy smile on her face, waits nervously for Jackson's pledge. She has longed for this day for a long time. Fortunately, God is fair. After today, Jackson will belong to her alone. But Jackson's next words completely shattered her dreams. In the eyes of everyone waiting expectantly, Jackson said, word for word, "I don't want to." The guests were stunned after hearing this. Emma's original happy smile also froze. She came back to her senses. She was so anxious that tears almost fell. "Jackson, did you say the wrong thing? You should say yes." Jackson violently shook off the hand Emma extended to him. His eyes were sharp as a blade. Emma was thrown to the ground. She shed tears of grievance. Her voice choked as she said, "Jackson, why are you doing this? I'm your bride. Everyone is looking at us." Jackson did not sympathize with her. Instead, he sneered and said, "You want to know? Then I'll show you." Suddenly, the wedding photo that was originally playing on the big screen was paused. Immediately afterwards, unacceptable images and sounds appeared on the screen. Emma's pupils contracted violently when she saw the familiar scenes. She screamed in horror, "Stop it! These aren't real." At the wedding, the bride was exposed as someone with a scandalous past, and she was about to marry into a wealthy family. This shocking news soon made headlines. The guests in the audience let out gasps of shock. Emma hurriedly knelt before Jackson, begged, "Jackson, please make it stop. You're ruining me." Jackson's expression was even colder than before. He shouted, "What, you're only scared now? 5 years ago, when you told this man in the video to frame Sophia, did you consider the consequences?" Emma was so shocked by the yelling that she couldn't speak. She wanted to explain but didn't know where to start. In the end, she could only cry and say, "Jackson, I only made a mistake because I love you so much. Please give me a chance. I really didn't mean it. And if you want to get back at me, I have no problem with that. But why did you have to choose this occasion?" Jackson laughed twice. In a casual tone, he said, "You want to marry me so much, then I'll grant your wish. Let me show you what it's like to fall from the top to the bottom." Emma didn't expect Jackson to plot against her like this. Fortunately, she had her own preparations. Since she couldn't have what she wanted, he wouldn't get it either. Emma suddenly burst out laughing. "Fine. Don't ever come begging to me again." Jackson didn't want to hear another word from Emma. He called the security guard directly. He took her out. In the hospital room, I was watching the wedding live broadcast on my phone. Suddenly, I heard someone push the door in from the outside. I didn't look up. I thought it was the doctor coming in for a checkup. He suddenly came close, covered my mouth with his hand. A strange smell made me gradually lose consciousness. It was then that I realized something was wrong. When I woke up, I found myself tied to a chair. When I looked up, I saw Emma staring at me with hatred in her eyes. When she saw me wake up, she suddenly came over and grabbed my chin with her hand. "Sophia, you've been gone for 5 years. Why did you have to come back now? Today was supposed to be my long-awaited wedding, but because of your appearance, Jackson gave up on me. I became the laughing stock of the whole city. I won't let you get away with it. You'll suffer with me." It turned out that Emma really did set me up. I looked at her in disappointment. I asked her, "Why did you do this? We're family." "Haha, family," Emma sneered. "It's because of you." Jackson never even looked at me in the eye. "I'm obviously no worse than you, but you took what should have been mine. Only when something happened to you and you left did Jackson notice how good I am." Emma and I are half-sisters. Her mother was my father's lover. After she was brought home, the family didn't love her. She blamed me for all her problems. She wanted to compete with me in everything. Seeing Emma lose control like that, I understood that she had lost her mind out of love. After she finished speaking, she suddenly pulled out a knife and held it against my neck. The cold and pain from the knife made me tremble. Emma had really lost control. She actually wanted to kill me. I can't die yet. My daughter is still waiting for me to raise the money for her medical expenses. I tried my best to control the fear in my heart. I pretended to be calm and said to Emma, "Don't be impulsive. It's not worth it to do something illegal for a man. Put the knife down. Otherwise, Emma, what are you doing? Let go of Sophia." I hadn't finished speaking when Jackson arrived in a hurry. He ran up to us with a nervous expression on his face. He hesitated a little when he wanted to come closer. Emma laughed loudly. "You came really quickly, but since you're here, it's perfect. I want to show you how I'll ruin her pretty face. I'm going to make Sophia look really ugly. Let's see if she still dares to cause trouble in the future." Then she pressed the knife against my face. I could feel the cold blade. I didn't dare to move, and I didn't dare to make a sound. "Emma," Jackson shouted nervously and coldly, "if you dare to touch her, I won't let you go." "Jackson," Emma shouted out of control, "I have loved you with all my heart for 5 years. Can't you feel my love at all?" Emma shouted. Since none of you care about me anymore, you can all go to hell with me." After saying that, she reached out to grab my face. I threw my head back hard. My head swerved. I dodged her knife. Seeing that I wasn't hurt, Emma completely lost her mind. She shouted, "Die," and raised her knife to stab me in the chest. I thought my life was over, but the expected pain didn't come. Jackson suddenly rushed towards me. He blocked the knife for me. Emma realized she had stabbed the wrong person. In panic, she threw the bloody knife away. She kept shaking her head, mumbling under her breath, "No, it's not my fault. You rushed at me yourself." At that moment, Assistant William arrived with the police. Emma was taken away by the police. Jackson and I went to the hospital together. Jackson had been in the resuscitation room for over an hour. The door was still closed. My heart was pounding. I never imagined that at the most dangerous moment for me, he would risk his life to save me. Emma's knife had pierced the main artery. What if he couldn't be saved? I didn't dare to think about it. Finally, the resuscitation room door opened. Jackson was wheeled out. His lips were pale. His face was pale. He looked very haggard. My heart suddenly felt a sharp pain. The doctor told me, "The patient is still in critical condition. He needs to be admitted to the intensive care unit." At that moment, my heart stopped for a moment. My whole body felt limp. With red eyes, I asked the doctor, "Is there any chance that he will wake up?" The doctor did not give me a clear promise. He just said that they would do their best to save him. On the one hand, I didn't know if Jackson would survive. On the other hand, my daughter was waiting for me to pay the medical bills. I felt suffocated by these two invisible forces. If I could do it all over again, I would rather never have seen Jackson again. He has yet to meet his daughter. I stayed outside for a long time. Only then did I return to my daughter's room. Dazed, but there was no daughter in the room. Thinking about what happened this afternoon, I hurriedly went to find the doctor. I asked around. It turned out that the doctor had taken her for tests. The doctor also told me that the hospital had found a donor whose bone marrow matched my daughter's. Once the tests were complete, the operation could be performed the day after the next. Hearing this good news made my previously low spirits suddenly feel much lighter. I said excitedly, "This is really great. Hope is finally saved. Doctor, can you tell me who that kind person is? I must thank him in person." The doctor said that he could not disclose his name and asked me to stop asking. I was also embarrassed to continue pursuing the matter and didn't say anything more. The doctor also told me that the cost of my daughter's treatment had already been paid in full. He told me to rest assured and wait for her to recover. I was shocked. I immediately guessed that Jackson must have arranged it. Jackson had been in the intensive care unit. No visitors were allowed, so I didn't think much about it. Now I just hope that they'll both be safe. My daughter's surgery went well, but in the hospital I never saw Jackson again. Emma was sentenced by the court. A few days later, Assistant William came to see me. He looked grave and threw a pile of documents at me. I suddenly felt uneasy. Could it be that something had happened to Jackson? Assistant William told me with a dejected expression, "Sophia, Jackson asked me to transfer most of his assets under his name to you." I responded immediately, "No, I won't accept this. I want him to talk to me in person." I held back the tears that were about to fall. I returned everything to Assistant William. Assistant William told me in detail everything Jackson had done. Jackson had known for a long time that Pan was his daughter. He hid it from me. He was a match for her. He was also the bone marrow donor. No wonder he didn't want the doctor to tell his name. He was worried that he might not recover from the operation. So he asked Assistant William to take care of these things in advance. It seems that he really regretted it. And he also made sure that my future life with my daughter was protected. But even though he was so badly injured, he decided to take the risk and donate bone marrow for his daughter. He was gambling with his life. He wanted us to always remember him. My daughter's condition gradually improved. Jackson was sent to a hospital abroad for treatment. I told my daughter every day, she is no longer an orphan without a father. She has a father who loves her very much. No matter what the future holds, we must all look forward.